Thank you. That's amazing. All right, good evening, everybody. We're going to go ahead and call the April 11th, 2023 meeting of the Planning Commission to order. It's approximately 6 p.m. I want to thank everybody for being here. If you want to find your seats, that'd be great. First order of business tonight will be roll call. We'll go ahead and start to my left, please, with Commissioner Gordon.
Debbie Gordon here.
Deb Cameron. Erica Harris.
Thomas O'Brien.
Elizabeth Shin.
Scott Brown.
Thank you, everybody. Next order of business is going to be a review and approval of the March 14th, 2023 minutes. Those were in our packet. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to have a look at that. If I may please request a motion.
I'll motion.
I'll second the motion to approve.
Was your motion to approve?
Yes, it was.
So we've got a motion to approve as well as a second. Is there any debate? All in favor of approving the minutes, raise your hand, please. All opposed, like sign. Looks like it carries unopposed. At this time, we have some organizational and procedural items I believe we need to be educated about or informed about. Paul, thank you.
Yep. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, commissioners. Just one quick clarification coming out of our March meeting. Moving forward, we will not count the applicant's presentation towards the 10 minutes for or against, largely for two reasons. And we did this sort of in conjunction with the city clerk. That's how they do it at the city council. And this way we keep it consistent for all of our boards and commissions, especially since cases here go to the city council after. So consistency is important. And two, if there's a long presentation, we otherwise run the risk of not allowing people to speak and use their right to speak at this public hearing. So what we'll do is we'll time the 10 minutes for by anyone who's not the applicant, we'll time the 10 minutes against, and we'll not time the applicant's presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. And your help with the timing and keeping us honest would be most appreciated along the way. So thank you. Do we have any unfinished business to entertain at this time? Okay, thank you. So on to new business. First order of business tonight is RZ 23-01 and SLUP 23-01, request to rezone 4470 Chamblee Dunwoody Road from OI to OD with a special land use permit request to increase the maximum allowed height to 4 stories. Madeline, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So our first item on the agenda, our first order of business, is the rezoning and special land use permit for 4470 Chamblee Dunwoody Road. Essentially, they are proposing a 4-story self-storage facility, and this necessitates both a rezoning for the use and a special land use permit for the height. So a little bit of background: the property was previously developed with a 64,000 square foot office constructed in 1974. In the aerial image, you can see that down on the south side of the property. Currently, there's some I-285 construction going on, and so that office is no longer in use. The current zoning is office institutional, and the character area is the Georgetown North Shallowford character area. The property is landlocked. It's located between the Georgetown Shopping Center and the Dunwoody Pines Retirement Community. It has no direct street access. I've outlined it in red so you can see it a little bit better. It's essentially surrounded by 3 other properties on 3 of its sides, and then abuts I-285 on the south. So the applicant is proposing to rezone the subject property from office institutional to office distribution to accommodate the construction of a self-storage facility. The main difference between the office distribution and the office institutional category is the allowance of these warehouse type uses. As I stated earlier, self-storage is not permitted within the office institutional district. One major difference in the use regulations in the building regulations between office institution and office distribution is that the distribution district limits the maximum height to 2 stories, but it allows additional height with the approval of a special land use permit. And so their proposed height of 4 stories is what's prompting that request. So the new structure will be built atop an existing surface parking lot. The setbacks for the property are a little strange because it's not a typical lot, but as you can see along the south property line along I-285, that's been deemed, the front setback of 75 feet, and the remaining setbacks along the side and rear are 20 feet and 30 feet. And the proposed structure does meet all of the required setbacks. And the height is a proposed maximum of 4 stories. Again, they're allowed to exceed that 4 stories with an approved SLUP, which staff is recommending approval of. The lot coverage maximum in this zoning district is 80%. That's the same amount of lot coverage allowed in the office institutional district, and they will be meeting that maximum lot coverage. There is a transition yard required per the code between office distribution and office institutional. Compliance with that isn't necessarily demonstrated on this site plan, but staff believes that would be, an easy adjustment to make, and compliance with that would be simple. So we don't see an issue there. The one point of contention here is that the applicant proposes that the access to the property remain the same. Staff is proposing that the southernmost curb cut for the Georgetown Shopping Center be closed. It does conflict with the entrance to I-285, which is directly south of the southernmost entrance. There's about 80 to 90 feet of difference between those. Per the city's access management plan, that distance should be much greater, at least 200 feet. So we do see that as an unsafe condition, and we feel the way to rectify that situation is to close the curb cut and reroute access to the site from another point. Georgetown Shopping Center has 2 other ingress and egress points to the north of this curb cut. So overall, we find that the project conforms with the approval criteria for a rezoning. The first criteria is whether that proposal is in conformance with the policy and intent of the comprehensive plan. So in this area, we have 2 plans going on. We have, of course, the general comprehensive plan, but then as part of the comprehensive plan, we also have a small area plan, the Georgetown Master Plan. And essentially those 2 plans envision a pedestrian and bicycle-oriented activity center with limited impacts from commercial development on residential neighborhoods, less surface parking, and high-quality design. Overall, the project will infill an existing parking lot. Because of its landlocked nature, it's not really conducive to really active uses. And so something that's low impact and low traffic and relatively quiet makes sense for this area. And they are providing some opportunities for pedestrian connectivity and also providing an option for future street connectivity. And we are requiring, an easement to formalize that. So again, overall, we find the proposal consistent with the comprehensive plan. The other criteria, the first is whether it will permit a use that is suitable in view of the adjacent and nearby properties. Although the zoning is changing from office institutional to office distribution, the proposed use of a storage facility would be less intensive than that of an office. It's less traffic and less activity. So we do find that it meets this criteria. And then the next criteria is whether the property would have reasonable economic use as it's currently zoned. And while it does have the ability to be developed, it had an existing office there, it could be redeveloped with another office. The reality in the situation is that maybe doesn't necessarily make sense these days. And again, looking at the specifics of this property, the way it's landlocked and the way it's positioned, low impact use like a self-storage facility, again, makes sense. The additional criteria of whether the proposal will adversely affect the existing use or usability of adjacent properties nearby, and whether there are supporting grounds for the approval of the zoning proposal. Overall, we see this as a low impact use. The nature of it is unobtrusive. The adjacent properties have substantially higher activity and higher impact. So overall, We don't see this as a traffic generator or a noise generator, and so we're recommending approval of the rezoning. For the specific special land use permit criteria, there's a lot of overlap between this and the rezoning criteria, so I won't go over all of that again. But overall, we find that the height would be appropriate for this area. It's adjacent to an existing 5-story retirement community and adjacent to a commercial shopping center. And it's also consistent with the height of the previous office building, which was also 5 stories. And so we don't see any issues or adverse impacts due to the height of the proposed structure. So overall, we are recommending approval subject to several conditions. One is requiring, just general conformance with the site plan and the exhibits. The site plan and the renderings. The second is requiring the sidewalk connection between Dunwoody Pines and the subject property. And then an easement for future connectivity along the western property line. And again, the western property line, that's what's adjacent to the Dunwoody Pines. And then the last curb cut is requiring that the southernmost curb cut be closed. So overall, again, we're recommending approval. If you have any questions regarding specifics on the property, I'm happy to answer those.
Okay, do we have any questions? We'll start to my left. Commissioner Gordon.
I just have one thing I want to clarify. So it's zoned for a 2-story. Is that what you said or not?
No, so currently in the office institutional district, we allow more than 2 stories. The maximum height is 5 stories in office institutional. But if they rezone to office distribution, the maximum height is limited to 2 stories in that district.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a couple questions, Madeline. Is there any ordinance or applicable rule that governs closing of the curb cut?
So in chapter 16 of our code, we have what's called our access management plan, and that establishes what's deemed sort of safe distances between curb cuts on different types of roads. So Chamblee Dunwoody Road is a fairly busy road. And so that stipulates a higher distance between curb cuts.
And is it currently, you said it's currently not in compliance with that for the 285 entrance?
Correct. It's non-conforming. It's too close to the I-285 entrance.
Okay. Was there any examination of whether the additional traffic going through that shopping center is going to be impacted?
We view this as a, low traffic sort of use, a low impact use. So we don't foresee any consequences as a result of that.
And then finally, the drive. So if you go on the drive, was the office building that was torn down as you're headed toward the property on the left-hand side?
Mhm.
And then the parking lot's on the right-hand side?
Correct.
And then is that daycare center in operation right now?
That's a separate property, and yes, it is operated
Okay.
currently.
And is there you said that the same owner owns the property that has the easement driveway?
Yeah, so 4470 and the Georgetown Shopping Center do have the same owner.
Right, thanks.
So the applicant's not here to ask questions to? Or so I just want to see if we're double asking questions, or if I have questions, should I say for their presentation?
We still have the for and against.
Okay, great. Okay. So my first question, could you pop back up, Madeline, and show me where just show where the crosswalk is going to be? The proposed one. I was having a hard time seeing it on my exhibit.
You're talking about this crosswalk here?
The addition, you said an additional crosswalk. So that's the one that you guys are proposing be added?
Are you talking about the access easement for future connectivity?
In your in the at the end, when you're asking for the amendments, you have a crosswalk is added. Did I read that incorrectly?
Uh, The condition, are you talking about the
The
conditions?
conditions, yes,
Oh,
like,
so the sidewalk connection, which is shown
Sorry.
here along the western property line on the site plan, if you can see my mouse on the screen. So that's what that condition is referring to, is that connection.
okay. And then are there loading docks here?
Yes, so there are loading docks specified here and here, and then I believe they'll also have loading in these locations as well.
And what size vehicles are they anticipating using the loading docks or utilizing the facility?
That might be a better question to
For them?
direct to the applicant.
Okay,
Um,
great, thanks.
Any other questions for Madeline before we hear from the applicant?
Just to clarify, in the Georgetown plan, it doesn't specify like a minimum or maximum height.
No, so the Georgetown master plan, what it says about height is that as you get closer to residential areas, height should step down, but this is behind a 5-story building, so we don't see an issue with that.
And then for the existing entrance that's on Chambly Dunwoody, that's next to 285. Did Public Works have any like crash data to support that
Not to
is
my
an issue?
knowledge.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, most of my questions are gonna be for the applicant, but I guess continuing on that curb cut closure. Just wondering, I mean, I know we're looking for better access management in general, but is there kind of a trigger here? I mean, I guess I just don't. I have some concerns about closing that entrance just because the other two access point, one of those kind of weaves through the Kroger parking lot. And if we're talking about moving vans and vehicles like that, I don't see that as very feasible. So that leaves the one other access point, which is unsignalized, whereas the other one is signalized. So I do want to ask the applicant about, you know, how much they've kind of thought about that circulation, but also for staff, just kind of what I guess, you know, since we're adding a new use that is, you know, while you call it low impact, there's still going to be a lot of vehicles moving in and out. And like I said, some of those are going to be larger moving trucks and vans and things like that. What, I guess, just a little more enlightenment or thought process behind what's triggering the request to close that entrance, other than the overall goal of access management. But there's, with this particular application, what kind of triggered that in your minds?
So, I mean, our main reason is sort of applying the access management plan in this situation, because they are the same owners. We do see this as something that is feasible. Of course, the applicant, you know, has their own explanation. Like I said, this is, you know, a point where we're not seeing eye to eye on that condition. So again, it is really related to our access management plan. And we haven't received any sort of alternative proposal from the applicant regarding access to the property. So they're proposing to maintain it as is, and our position is it should not be maintained as is.
Maybe a better question would be if this was a different type of use or a less intense use or an office, would staff also be asking the same thing? Was there some kind of threshold, or would this have been really with any application that was presented to you guys with this property? Would you have asked for that closure?
I think any redevelopment that would have been associated with a zoning action like this would have prompted this request,
Okay.
regardless of the nature of the use.
Yeah, that's all I have for staff at this time.
Okay, at this point, I'd invite the applicant to come forward and share a little bit of information about what you think we should know.
Oh, now let's. Let's put that image.
Okay, there.
How do I change the page? I just-
So do this. And then you could scroll through like that.
Got it, okay. Sorry about that, technical difficulties. My name is Den Webb, 1105 West Peachtree Street, Atlanta, Georgia, 30309 here on behalf of the applicant. Before I begin, let me introduce a couple folks who are here with me. First is Paul Ludwig. Paul is the Vice President of Development for Coro Realty Advisors. And to his right is Adam Holland, who is the Vice President of Asset Management. Both are ready and willing to take your questions. Let me start by just touching on a couple things that were brought up in the staff presentation. First of all, we do not agree with the proposed condition to close the curb cut on Shambo Dunwoody Road. Just want to be clear of that. That property is next to our site, but this particular development is not part of Georgetown Plaza. So that property is not in front of you. Madeline talked a little bit about, a code section that talks about distance between curb cuts, but that really applies to new development, not existing development. And really the only way to close an existing curb cut is through a condemnation. Second of all, there was a question about the daycare that is in operation, and the only access they have to Shambo Dunwoody Road is along that route that Madeline talked about. They have a recorded legal easement right to travel along the private driveway that bisects this property along the east side of Georgetown Plaza up to Shambo Dunwoody Road. So obviously they would be impacted by any kind of closure. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I've got on the screen first, a survey of the property. Just shows you generally where it's located. I think you probably picked that up from Madeline's presentation, but again, it's behind Georgetown Plaza and east of a senior development called Dunwoody Pines. This property is 3.65 acres. It's zoned O&I, and it shows as commercial on the future land use map. And you can see this private road that I was talking about. The daycare is to the northwest corner, the southwest corner of that site, that sort of empty square there. And as Madeline demonstrated, the only way to get to this site is along that private driveway along the east side of Georgetown Plaza to Shambo Dunwoody Road. I've got some images to show you that what was there previously. This was there until just a couple months ago. It was a 5-story office building that was affected by the work going on I-285. The Georgia Department of Transportation came in, condemned part of the property, and wound up acquiring this building and taking it down. That's how it became available. North of this site on the other side of the private driveway is this parking lot that is still there. Here's our site plan. Madeline did a good job of previewing this, but the hope, as you heard, is for a 4-story self-storage facility. So it's 4 stories with a basement. If you've been on that site, there's a little bit of a drop in the topography. So the basement would be on the west side of that site. The total square footage of this building is 140,000 square feet. There'll be an office on the first floor. It's contemplated to have about 800 units total, which will range in size from 25 to 300 square feet. And let me talk a little bit about the hours of operation. There will be someone in the office from 9 to 6, Monday through Saturday. There'll be keyless access for customers of this particular facility from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. 7 days a week. And the building will be closed from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. every day as well. So this will not be a 24/7 facility. I've got some slides that show you the images of what the building is going to look like. The intent was to create a design that looked like an office building. So you'll see 4 sides brick, glass, and cementitious accents here. As you heard, staff is recommending approval of the application. And so I'm going to abbreviate my presentation somewhat to get to your questions, but let me just touch on a few points. As Madeline mentioned, I think it's certainly I think we're in agreement that this is consistent with what's in the area. We had a 5-story building on this property until about 2 months ago. There's a 5-story building right next door to our west in the Dunwoody Pines Senior Facility. It's consistent with what I think the city envisions for this area in the future. As you heard the staff say, this application meets the comp plan designation requirements. And I think importantly, it's relatively low impact. There's no impact to the schools. There's a very minor impact to traffic, and as staff mentioned, there's also a very minor impact to traffic. And I think it's important to recognize that there are limited uses for this property because of the access issues. And I think that's one reason why Coro has spent a lot of time trying to figure out what would make sense here, and we think we found it. In terms of the conditions, Madeline went through those. The first 3 we're fine with. Okay, so really the 4th one that we have trouble with. It reads, the southernmost curb cut for 4478 Chamblee Dunwoody Road shall be closed prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy for the subject self-storage facility at 4470 Chamblee Dunwoody Road. So we are 4470 Chamblee Dunwoody Road. Georgetown Plaza is 4478. As I mentioned, 4478 is not a part of this application. And I've tried to make this point to staff. It is illegal to condition the zoning of one property on a change on something else. It's not a part of the application, but just putting that issue to the side, I touched on this in the beginning. There are other reasons why we cannot close that curb cut. Ashford Academy is one. There is a recorded easement right to travel from their driveway along our private driveway along the east side of Georgetown Plaza to Chamblee Dunwoody Road. It is in the records. I provided a copy to staff. It exists. It's a property right that they own, and we cannot interfere with it. We've also got leases where tenants have similar rights. I provided this information to staff as well. If you know that development, or excuse me, no, Georgetown Plaza, the Starbucks is right there at that curb cut that they want to close. And let me read a section from their lease. Landlord shall not vary or permit to be varied the existing means of ingress to and egress from the Starbucks and the shopping center in any manner that would affect tenants' business operations. And Kroger, just so you know, has a similar provision, which I've also provided to staff. So, you know, there are a lot of reasons why we can't close it, even if we wanted to. It's something, obviously, we've had conversations with about staff. We provided information on it, and we're still having this conversation. So we'd ask that that provision not be included. I think I'm going to stop there. I'm happy to take any questions you have. I'll reserve my time, and we'd ask again for your recommendation approval, subject to the first three staff conditions, but not the fourth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure necessarily that we need to worry about a time reservation at this point. What I think I'd like to do is go ahead and invite folks up to speak for or against, and then we'll circle back with all of our questions
Okay.
at the end of it. So anybody who would like to speak in favor of this SLUP and rezoning, please step forward. Okay. Is there anybody here to speak against it? I will note that we, commissioners, that we received a copy of an email from an individual, one Ms. Nichols, who expressed concern about the impact of that interchange. So you'll want to take a look at that and perhaps be advised by it as we move forward with our questions. So with that said, I think hearing nobody wishing to speak for or against, we'll move to commissioner questions. This time, Commissioner Brown, would you care to start with your questions?
Sure. First, I maybe want to just correct a statement that you made about, while I do have concerns about closing that access near Starbucks, it's not the only way for folks to get in and out of the daycare. They can circulate around that small part of the shopping center. It's just a little less convenient. So I don't want anybody to think that it would not be accessible if that curb cut was closed. I, of course, can't speak to the legality that you spoke to, but that may be something we would need to check on. My other concern is the location of the loading docks for the building. The one on the east side, I don't have any issue with, but on the west side, you've got some loading docks, and we've got a very, very small distance between those loading docks and the adjacent retirement community building. Looks like about 25 feet from basically the southeast corner of that building. I want to see if there could be any reconfiguration so that maybe that loading dock could be either on the north or south side of the building instead of on the west side. I just see that as something that's going to generate a lot of noise, and you've got windows right there that are going to be 25, 30 feet away from a lot of loading and unloading of this facility.
Certainly we can look at anything. You know, that's where one of the access points into the building is, but we can, I made a note, we'll take a look at that. Just to respond to your first point, Ashford Academy only has the right to traverse that path. So they have an easement. They don't have the legal right to just snake their way through the parking lot of Georgetown Plaza. That is a designated legal route that they have to follow. So just, I know that's legal mumbo jumbo. It doesn't really matter here, but I just wanted to clarify that. They don't have the right to traverse all the way through that shopping center, legally at least. Practically, there may be a different answer.
I don't fully understand that. Are you saying they're like they're the vehicles that service their location, or just, I mean, anybody could go into that middle access point and get back there?
Yeah, but I'm talking about from a legal standpoint, okay? Ashford Academy doesn't own Georgetown Plaza. They have no ownership interest. They have a right to traverse from the property line to Shambo Dunwoody Road along that 20-foot easement area. Now, from a practical standpoint, if someone coming out of there wants to, turn left on Shambo Dunwoody Road, they may go out of a different exit, but from a legal standpoint, they're not really allowed to do that. And I guess theoretically, Georgetown, while it probably wouldn't do it, could enforce, the terms of the easement. Again, it's legal mumbo jumbo, but I want to clarify that.
Thank you for that clarification.
Commissioner Shin?
So with the existing property and the demolition of the existing office building due to the 400-285 project and then the upcoming 285 like managed lanes project, how is that going to impact that existing easement for this property and then the daycare? I mean, I don't see on their plans on 285 GDOT's plans that they're closing off that existing access, but it's possibly going to be impacted.
We think that our site plan, which I have in front of you, reflects the GDOT taking, right? You'll notice that there's a big empty area there. We've left it empty on purpose because no one really knows what's going to happen in that area, but we think we've defined the limits of the GDOT expansion. So it should not impact our easement area. It should not impact Ashford Academy.
Okay. And then I guess this might be a question for Madeline, sorry. Is the architecture style that they're showing also compliant with what the Georgetown plan has, or is there any specification in that?
So the design is consistent with the Georgetown Area Master Plan design requirements. It specifies that, brick, stone are, appropriate materials, and that sort of more traditional architectural styles are appropriate. And we feel that this design reflects those.
Thank you.
Commissioner Harris?
So I think my big concern, and I think we've batted around this, is going to be the curb cut. So I frequent that shopping center quite a bit. And when I saw this, I came out and I spent a little bit of time there as well. I am concerned over a couple of things. I would be concerned over closing that curb cut. One, because if you use the lighted entrance, it already is a dangerous intersection by itself. Currently, as it stands, we have a lot of delivery trucks that come and they stop right in front of those shops and they gum it up. You have it's a very narrow passageway, and so cars are backed up. So I'm trying to imagine, if we close that curb cut, I'm trying to imagine what would be potentially U-Haul vehicles moving through and gumming up that lighted entrance even more. And then there's also the other entrance, which is on the north side of Starbucks, over by Taqueria. And that one's not lighted, and it also has a tendency to, not on entrance, but on exit, get backed up. So that, even though that's right by the 285, it really, to me, seems to be the most feasible area to have egress to the property. My but to that is that if we start allowing more vehicles that are larger in size, for example, if we're moving in U-Hauls, then we're going to exacerbate what already is, to staff's point, an area that tends to get backed up. So if the vehicle's wanting to move directly onto the 285 and you have a large moving truck, that's not so much of a problem. But I've witnessed, and today I witnessed a large delivery truck being stuck there and blocking traffic for about 15 minutes because they were unable to leave the property to make a right. It's so, I guess my question to you after all of that, I don't know a lot about self-storage. So what is your anticipated rate of U-Hauls on a daily basis outside of an SUV? How often are people using moving vans? And my follow-up question to that is going to be, I know you gave us the office hours, but from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., could we expect those larger moving vehicles to also be utilized outside of what would be traditional business hours?
So let me tell you what I've heard. I might have to get Adam to come up here because he's the expert, but predominantly you see U-Haul type trucks and lower. Okay, you don't get the 18-wheelers typically. They're the kind of thing you and I can go to the store and rent. And, you know, obviously when I do it, I try and get the smallest truck I can possibly get away with because I'm not comfortable driving the big ones. Once the building is fully occupied, traffic really drops off. I mean, I think we probably all rented stuff in a facility like this. You show up, you drop it off, and you don't come back very often for probably a year or two until you move again. So there is a relatively larger amount of traffic in the beginning as the building's becoming occupied, but once it's occupied, for the most part, the traffic really falls off. In fact, I looked at the ITE numbers, and Adam and I talked about these. The trip generation in the morning, according to ITE, is 20 trips. In the PM, it's 32. And by the way, I compared it to the office building that left the site. So the AM trips to the office were 100 trips, and then the PM trips were 96. So obviously, this is a lot less traffic. But in my conversations with Adam, the message was, you know, those numbers may make sense once we're trying to lease up the building, but once it's occupied, those numbers really go down. So, you know, again, I've used these twice, not, you know, and I can tell you this, I moved in a U-Haul truck on a morning, and I didn't come back until I was moving again. So I suspect, again, anecdotally at least, that's what most of the traffic is. Very light traffic, U-Haul truck or less, and a lot of cars, Suburbans, pickups, and things of that nature.
So 800 units on average, we'll say 50 visits a day. So if we run that number and they were utilizing it once a year, we're talking, and perhaps someone who has more, you know, experience with this, the car volume is, I'm not as concerned about. The U-Haul volume I am concerned about. So how many U-Hauls a day?
I can't answer that. I don't know if that's something you could guess at. That's a tough question to answer. We can try and get a little bit more data on that between now and the city council, but I don't know the answer to that.
I think that would be important to know, just because of the property and because of the location by the 285, the lack of really good lighted access to that. I think that's my only concern with this property. I appreciate that it's 4 stories. I actually think that it's a great use of the space. I'm concerned about the access to it and then what trucks with that area could look like.
One of the components of the access that we have talked about is segregating that truck traffic or the storage traffic from the mall, the shopping center traffic. And that's why maintaining that easement on the east side of the property is important. They've got a direct line in and out. They don't have to weave through the parking lot. They don't have to get in, you know, wait for mom who's loading her SUV to clear the driveway either. So that was an aspect of access that we did spend a lot of time talking about.
No, I think that's great. And you all own both the Kroger, Georgetown, and this property. So you own both. They're separate properties, but you own both.
Well, there's yes. In a
Okay.
very general sense, I'm not sure the ownership aligns directly. There's a little bit of difference in the ownership, but generally speaking, Coral Realty Advisors owns both.
Okay, yeah, I think as a Starbucks frequenter, having that gummed up there, and this is why I'm sticking on it, it is a tricky area. You have that Starbucks line already gets insane, is dangerous. And everything gets backed up. I am concerned about the backup that would occur with the truck. So I think finding more data about what that U-Haul usage would be and just making sure that in particular, the exit, The entrance, I'm not concerned about that. The exit is somehow controlled and flowed. I think that's going to be a sticky point for this project. And that's all I've got.
Commissioner Cameron?
In the parking lot, who parks there currently?
I don't know if anyone parks there. Yeah, I mean, that office building was in use, I think, up until, 8 to 12 months ago. So they were parking there. There's actually some cars in the photo I pulled off Google Earth here, but technically now that the building's gone, no one's supposed to be parking there.
So it was the people who went to the office?
Oh, yes,
there?
ma'am. That's,
Yeah.
yes, it was for the
Okay.
office building.
Okay, I've just been looking at the easement language and I have some concerns about that, but I don't know off the top of my head how that impacts the people who have the easement. So that's also a concern of mine. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Gordon?
So it looks like, the storage facility will have its own parking. They won't have to be parking in the shopping center parking lot, right?
That's correct. There,
Okay.
we've separated those uses completely.
Right. Okay, and, so if you're saying that legally they can't close off that easement, but the city's saying you have to, I don't understand how that can be.
I'm saying the city can't say that. Other, absent a condemnation, the city could certainly come in and condemn that curb cut and pay Ashford Academy for its property right and pay, Georgetown Plaza for its property right. But they can't do it through a zoning condition. It's a taking, and it's a taking that would impact our lease rights too, because now we're going back to Starbucks and, Ms. Harris said she's going in and out of there all the time. I'm sure you're using that access. In the lease, we have to maintain that. And as I said, there's a similar provision for Kroger. So again, we've talked about it. I'm sure we'll continue to talk about it. I've talked about it to Paul when I first got here today, and I'm it will continue on beyond this. But my position is the city can't do it. Their position is I think it's more, we'd really like it. It makes a lot of sense.
Okay, that's all I.
Thank you. Couple of questions. I know these buildings often have some front-facing retail on the bottom or rental facilities, or are we looking at providing other business services than storage?
No, we talked about that. Retail is all about access and visibility. Both are lacking at this property. We talked about it. I've done that on other projects, but it really wouldn't work here. So no.
Okay, so strictly storage.
Yes,
No.
sir.
Okay. And does that include such things as like, box sales, tape sales, that sort of thing? I don't, again, how does that look? Is there a walk-up component that's not just, let me, rent space?
Adam, why don't you step up here and answer that question? Adam is our expert on self-storage. Don't say that now.
Yes. So there is an office component to it, which is staffed by a property manager for the site, and then usually assistant manager for security while they kind of the operating hours, and they do limited sales of tape and boxes. They have tapes, they sell locks, usually a lock that is proprietary to this unit or this type of latch, but it's really hard to describe if you've been in one, but maybe a small display, like a 4x8 display of here's some boxes, here's some tape, here's some bubble wrap, but it's nothing, it's no major operation like a UPS store or anything like that.
So near complete overlap with the folks that are actually attempting to rent units then? Is that the anticipated?
Yes, it's someone who's actually already approached and rented. If they
Okay,
happen to need a box, like their box gets ripped, or they want to tape up their stuff, or maybe they're coming to get something and move it out. But most, they don't, it's not a very big part of the business.
okay,
It's just there because, it needs to be as a
gotcha. And
amenity.
but no vehicle rental or subsequent storage to support vehicle rental
There'd
would
be no
take
vehicle
place.
rental or vehicle storage. If you look at our site, we don't even need as much parking as we have. In my experience in building this kind of product, they aren't very busy, even during lease up. I'm there quite often speaking with the management and just, again, looking at our asset. And I've only been in an office once or twice when there was more than one person in there renting at a time. Usually once your stuff gets in, it's gone. You know, so it's away, it's out of your room, you know, you're enjoying your new space. People just like to be near their stuff. So when they go to Kroger, they're near their stuff, but they're not actually visiting their stuff. Very rarely people visit their stuff unless they're coming to get something.
Okay. And have you all engaged, the daycare in particular is of interest because there's likely to be traffic on that north facing portion of the daycare. Have you engaged them in any conversations about the change of the nature of traffic? I know it sounds like it's lower volume, but it's amateur truck drivers.
We sent them some information on this project and haven't heard anything back from them. So
Okay.
yes and no, I guess. We did engage them. They did engage with us, I guess is the answer.
And similar question with the senior living, since they've got the dock facing them, have you engaged them as well? in
I've
that?
had a phone call with someone from the senior living facility. They're based in Oregon or somewhere far away. So I had a phone call with a woman from that company, and then I've had some follow-up emails. I sent another person, a man, a complete copy of our application. He's asked me some questions along the way. His big question really was, are you going to try and come through our parking lot? Right? I can't speak for him, but in our conversation, that's what I gleaned. That's what he was worried about. And I said, no, the city's asked for an easement. So if that possibility, you know, arose in the future, we would have an access point, but we're not planning obviously on coming through his parking lot. So I have not heard anything from him or her since I've responded to that question.
Okay. Okay. And I've got a couple of questions, Madeline, I'd like to pose to you if I may. In moving from OI to OD, does the pervious versus impervious ratio change at all?
No, it's the exact same, 80%.
Okay, so we're not losing or gaining anything there. And is there any merit to the argument that this constitutes a taking? Have we put that question to our council?
My interpretation is that there is a rational nexus between our request to close the curb cut and the development, and that's what you need when it comes to requesting conditions. And again, because they're the same owner, because this is a redevelopment, a change of use, a change of zoning, and because their access is through the 4478 property, we do see it as, you know, a valid request.
Okay, and I mean, I see valid points on both sides of that. Is this something that would be wise to put to our council before making any decision to go forward or not? Okay, thank you. That's all I need to know at this point. Okay, there are follow-up questions from Commissioner Harris, if you please.
I have a quick question. I forgot to follow up on the question about, so we have 9 to 6 p.m. people will be in the office, leasing agents will be in the office, but then from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., people will be allowed to access their storage unit. So my first question is, does that mean utilizing the loading docks as well during that time? Like what kind of traffic could we see there? Like full move-ins, move-outs? Or just like use the front door, go pull out a picture of mom?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the unattended times, it is a keyless or keypad or a fob access. These aren't per se loading docks. These are usually double doors, automatic opening doors that you see at Kroger or, you know, Publix. There's no way for a vehicle to kind of back up to a dock to load from a large vehicle. In our experience, most of our units are going to be 5x5 and 10x10. You can move those in smaller trucks for 5x or, you know, minivan. You could fill a 5x5 up, and a 10x10 is a pickup truck. Our larger units, yes, would attract, you know, U-Haul per se, but there's no way to, like, you know, back up, and you don't hear the same sounds you hear like an industrial warehouse or even deliveries done to the Georgetown Shopping Center. You know, you're not hearing the big roll-up doors and all that. Most of our traffic, in my experience, has been larger pickup trucks, a trailer, and small U-Hauls. You know.
On that note, though, what I'm trying to do is be cognizant of the retirement home right there. And knowing that at 10 PM. That's quite late. Madeline, what is our hours for the loading and unloading or deliveries for the Kroger and the other businesses in that area?
I would have to look up and see if we have anything specific in our code. To my knowledge, off the top of my head, our noise ordinance, the only thing it really restricts in terms of timing is construction hours. Not necessarily, loading and things of that nature, but I would have to do a double check on the code regarding that question specifically.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to keep the retirement home in mind about wanting to be courteous neighbors. So my follow-up question to that, again, with the 10 PM would be lighting. So what does the exterior lighting look like until 10 PM on that loading area? Is there going to be lighting for people to be able to see what they're loading and unloading? Again, trying to be cognizant of how this could impact the retirement community.
As far as any kind of light pollution of the neighboring properties, we have constructed a similar product in the city of Roswell downtown and their historic and Groveway districts. And light pollution was a huge, concern of theirs as well. We use directional LED that just fills a certain area. We will have a lighting plan as part of our submittal. As we go forward, we'll be able to see an engineering report where it shows light that emits. Our light emits down, it doesn't emit out. It's a directional LED product. You see it a lot now. Most new developments have this product.
Do you have a site plan that shows the building's relationship to how far it is from the actual retirement home?
I
'Cause I-
don't have one here, but it's about, from our measurement, from the loading area to the corner, which would I guess be the southeast corner of the retirement, is about 90 feet.
Okay,
And that's the corner of the building. To windows, it might be a little more.
okay,
But it's the corner to center.
right. Just as a favor for planning commission in the future, it is helpful for us to see complete packages. And so that would include where we can visualize and things like lighting and whatnot. It's helpful for us when we look at things. It can speed up processes and whatnot.
Understood.
All right, those were my 2 follow-up questions. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions, comments, or concerns, or are we ready to entertain a motion or recommendation? I want to remind folks that if we believe that there is importance to hearing from council before we move forward, or wanting to see additional more fully formed plan with regard to the lighting, it is perfectly appropriate. We have the right to push this forward, to delay our decision on it if you wish to do so. Again, just making you aware.
I would like to see city council or council, not CILSEL, council lawyer. Look at the question of the easement rights for the existing tenants in the shopping center, and also the tenant rights for some of the I think they said Starbucks may also have some rights to that driveway. I don't think we want to get ourselves into a situation where we're improperly taking property rights.
If you would care to form that as a motion, we can then see if there's a second and address it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would make a motion to defer this case 1 month to the next meeting to allow council to speak to the easement concern and also allow us to see the lighting plan. And I would also like to hear more about the proposed easement that staff may be working with the retirement community on that. Yes. That's it.
Okay, we've got a motion from Commissioner Harris to defer based on exploring the legal issues around the curb cut, seeing a lighting plan, and further discussion around the retirement community proposed easement. Did I state that correctly?
Mhm.
Okay, is there a second to that motion?
A second.
Okay, Commissioner Cameron seconds that at this time. Is there any debate on the motion in front of us? All right, at this time, all in favor of approving the motion as voiced, raise your hand. All opposed, like sign. The motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, pushing forward. We now have titled item number 3, SLUP 23-02, special land use permit for 5342 Tilly Mill Road to allow an existing neighborhood recreation club and for the construction of new sport courts. Thank you, Madeline. This time, counselors, I'm going to go ahead and ask applicant to come up after Madeline and speak, and then we will have our opportunity for questions. Thank you, everybody.
Good evening again. The next case under consideration is SLUP 22-02 for the Marcus Jewish Community Center of Atlanta, the MJCCA. They are requesting a special land use permit to allow all of their existing improvements to remain and for the construction of new sport courts, including 12 pickleball courts and 1 multi-purpose court. So a little bit of background, the MJCCA is considered a neighborhood recreation club. That's how it's designated as a use per our code. And they have operated in Dunwoody since 1961, and they offer a variety of amenities, outdoor recreation, summer camps, community meeting spaces, etc. The current zoning is R-100. This is pretty consistent for basically all of our neighborhood recreation clubs and almost all of our churches here in Dunwoody. They all are within our single family neighborhood, and they're all under the R-100 zoning in the suburban neighborhood character area. Several of the existing churches operate with a special land use permit, but we do have lots of facilities that were done in the early days of DeKalb County, pre our more strict zoning standards. And so they operate, as what's called legal non-conforming uses because they're operating without a special land use permit. And whenever one of those facilities comes forward to us wanting to make major, amendments or improvements to their site, that's what triggers the special land use permit. And we use that as an opportunity to make them legally conforming to our code. And so this request is inclusive of, again, all of the existing improvements, but what we're really looking at specifically is what's triggering the special land use permit, which is their expansion of their sport courts. So overall, what they're proposing are some minor improvements to their parking lot facilities and their pool facilities. And you can see that on the site plan. If you can see my mouse, it'll be letter E and number 7. But then the major improvement that's triggering the request is the new sport courts, which also have a viewing platform and meeting facilities. So this is the general layout on this site plan. This is Tilly Mill Road, just for reference. So overall, it does comply with all of the required setbacks for the R-100 zoning district. The included elevations don't exactly conform with our maximum height requirements of 35 feet, but that is easily, rectified, and we would enforce the 35-foot height requirement. So we don't see that as an issue. And then overall, the maximum lot coverage for this type of use is 60%, and they are meeting this proposed lot coverage. And then again, due to the magnitude of this improvement, their parking lot improvements and the addition of these sport courts are triggering stormwater mitigation requirements. So that will be required as part of any land disturbance permit process. So overall, we are recommending approval of the special land use permit. As far as the specific criteria go, we do find that it meets the requirements of the comprehensive plan. One of the stated specific goals is to enhance residential amenities. And we find that the expansion of the outdoor recreation facilities is consistent with that goal. And we do find that it complies with obviously the setbacks and the lot coverage. And as I stated, the maximum height requirement would be enforced and it would be met as part of the permitting process. And we do find that there's adequate land on this property to accommodate, such an expansion. It is set back significantly far from any adjacent residences. The required setback is 40 feet, and this is set back around 75 to 80 feet from those to the closest neighbors on Dunwoody Glen. So we find that it is accommodating these proposed improvements. The next criteria is whether the proposed use will create adverse impacts, specifically related to noise, smoke, odor, and dust and vibration. The only adverse impact we anticipate, so they're proposing specifically pickleball courts, and those are typically louder than other outdoor recreation activities like tennis. And so as a result, we are requesting that they provide some noise abatement and provide us with a strategy for that. Some strategies that other places have implemented have been simply attaching noise abatement barriers to the fencing material, but we're certainly open to other, abatement strategies. But we are requiring that as a condition of approval. And then additionally, whether the proposed use is compatible with adjacent properties and land uses. So overall, we do find it compatible with those adjacent, properties. Again, the MJCCA has existed in this, neighborhood since 1961, with very little issue. The hours of operation are consistent with, the hours of operation specifically for the sport courts are consistent with the hours of operation of the complex overall. And again, provided that noise abatement strategies are implemented, we don't see any issues. And we also don't see foresee any adverse impacts from the sport courts. Per the applicant, the intention of these sport courts is not necessarily to increase the volume of people that they can accept in their membership. It's to accommodate existing activities that are already occurring. So we don't see any great traffic increase impacts expected. And then again, overall, the structure of the heights will be limited to 35 feet, and we don't see any adverse impacts, again, because they're set back so far from the property line. Then that's not going to have an effect on neighbors. So overall, we're recommending approval. The first condition is our standard approval condition, essentially tying them to the site plan and the exhibits that they've submitted. And the second requirement is for them to maintain their existing mature tree canopy along the neighbors adjacent to Dunwoody Glen, and requiring that 40-foot buffer to be maintained and supplemented where necessary. And then the third condition again is to provide sound abatement. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Thank you. At this time, we'll invite the applicant to come up and provide us their presentation as well. Please introduce yourself and thank you for being here.
I have technical difficulties too.
Let me set it up super quick.
I put this on your chair, by the way. I can do this.
Okay, thank you.
I have some handouts. Can I go with them?
Okay. And make sure you leave word with the city so that I can be informed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. O'Brien, members of the commission, I'm Kathy Sickert with Smith, Gambrell and Russell, also at 1105 West Peachtree Street. I practice with that young gentleman who preceded me. And I am representing the Marcus Jewish Community Center of Atlanta, which is an incredible honor for me. I've been representing MJCCA for about 25 years. So a lot of the things that you just heard about, that Madeline talked about, the campus being used for, has evolved over that period of time. And although it is the Jewish Community Center, it is certainly not exclusively Jewish. Approximately 20% of its membership is non-Jewish. My own child went to preschool, did the swim team there, and I hate swim team, and also did the summer camp during the summers, oddly enough. So we feel a real attachment to this facility. And every time I've been fortunate enough to be retained to help these folks, I think we've done something to the community to make it better. I think Madeline did a great job of explaining to you what we want to do. I want to clarify it a little bit. And the first thing I want to talk about is pickleball. Right now, we have pickleball courts on site, but we are sharing the tennis courts, the basketball court, the gymnasium. You know, we're putting up basically fake lines, which is sort of modifying a tennis court and the like, so that the pickleball courts will fit. And that's great, except that then those other sports can't use the facility for which they were intended. And I suspect, have to advise you of the popularity of pickleball that has arisen over the past couple of years. And we, like anyone else, have a burgeoning league and want to be able to accommodate it. So we're going to move the temporary spaces out of where they are at present and create 12 new courts. 4 of those will be completely open air. 8 will be covered, but not like a building is covered. It's more like something that you could roll down. So if there was inclement weather, if it was really hot and you wanted a shade, you could do that. And then we are also coming back out of the Kuniansky building, which is an existing building on site, and setting up a viewing platform so that people could sit there and watch the games in that manner. One of the things that I think is really impressive about this campus is the lack of lot coverage. It's not just that it's below what is allowed. We are at 33%. And considering that we are a 50-acre tract and we are an intense tract in the sense that we have a whole lot of different things going on it, we have been able to maintain the open space and to maintain the existence of this particular center in the midst of a residential community, which isn't at all unusual for this kind of a request. I know when I lived in Dunwoody, there were a lot of neighborhood swim clubs that had the tennis courts and had other types of sports and recreational activities. And we are no different. And I think there have been some recently approved in new subdivisions within Dunwoody, as well as in existing homeowners association circumstances. We met with residents on 2 separate occasions. One, of course, was the required meeting that the city asked us to have. But the second one, we did our own and reached out to Dunwoody Glen to make sure that we could answer any questions they might have. And Ms. Harris, I appreciate your comments about lighting and the like. And we did go to the trouble of making sure that we did a lighting study, which is part of the packet I just provided you. And we also did a noise study, which is, I think, an important issue here. Right now, there are existing fields where we're going to place these structures and a barn. I didn't realize there used to be horses on this site, but there were. So it's not like that the site isn't being used. It is actually being used in fact for some recreational purposes. But we're cognizant of the fact that I don't know that they're louder than tennis players. Is that what they're saying? Pickleball players are louder? I did not know that. But in any event, we are certainly mindful of the fact that outside of the hours of operation, when we are not there, of course, it won't be a problem, which means nights are not really an issue. But we want to make sure that we're good neighbors. So we did this noise study, which I've also given you a copy of. And the conclusion of that study essentially is that at the property line, there should not be any noise impact based on the distance between the property line, as well as the existence of the buffer that Madeline just spoke with you about, that it is a mature buffer. And we have agreed and committed to go ahead and enhance that as community development may require, so that we make sure that the buffer is intact. But we do not believe that a sound barrier is warranted here. And that's why we did the noise study. We wanted to make sure that if we were going to make commitments, there were commitments we needed to make, and that does not appear to be the case here. So if you are favorably disposed to approve this application, we are asking that you delete that 3rd condition. If you want us to review with staff the report, and I did just give it to Madeline, and I have extra copies here as well, we'll be happy to do that and sit down and discuss certain landscaping enhancements that might actually would be a better solution here. But in terms of actually a noise barrier, we do not think that is warranted. So with all of that said, we are going to ask you for your approval this evening. I do have folks here with me from the Marcus Jewish Community Center of Atlanta, including appropriate engineering personnel and management of the center in case you have questions that I cannot answer. But I would ask you to support the application tonight with the exception of condition number 3. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. At this time, I see a lot of faces here, so I'd like to go ahead and move forward with having folks speak forward and against, and we will then pose questions and suss things out a little bit further, if you please. So with that said, people in favor of this application as written are welcome to come up and speak. Please come up one at a time. We're going to limit the amount of time for each position to 10 minutes total. So we would ask that if there are multiple individuals expecting to speak, that you be mindful of other individuals wishing to speak as well. Is anybody wishing to come up to speak for and in favor of the proposal? If so, please come forward one at a time, introduce yourself, and proceed.
How you doing? My name is David Abus. I live at 1616 Prestwick Lane, Dunwoody, Georgia, 30338. I've been a member of the JCC and my family since I was a little kid. I play basketball there. My wife plays tennis, pickleball, and this is just, I think it's an amazing thing just to keep improving because honestly, I play basketball and pickle people are on our basketball court. So I'd love to see them have their own facility to enjoy what they're doing. So my kids play sports there also. I think this can be an amazing thing for the community in general.
Thank you. I believe I saw another hand of an individual who wished to speak in favor. Last call. Anybody who wishes to speak in favor? All right, well, I have received a couple of public comment cards in the against pile. So with that, we will initiate speaking against. I see somebody waving their hand as well. We'll get to you as well. I'm going to go ahead and call the people whose cards we have now. For those of you that have not provided me with a card, I'd ask you to give a copy to the city as you come up to speak. First person who submitted a card, I believe I'm going to pronounce this right, hopefully. Nancy Etchickson, please. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and hello, William speak. Boy, do I wish you were here 20 or 25 years ago because residents were not consulted about anything at the first expansion. We found out. Oh, sorry. Wish that you had been here before because we weren't consulted as neighbors about anything and found out after the fact. I live next to the day camp. The longest border of my house is with the JCC, and I am directly parallel to the day camp. I would say that my house is about as far from that wall to where you're sitting with their outdoor sound system and thumping bass speakers and all the noise. And I'm not talking about noise of children. I am woken up at 7:39 every summer morning for 3 months with that thumping coming up through my pillow. I talk to them every year. They used to see me in person. Now they have people call me on the phone who tell me that the subject is not negotiable, not neighborly at all. Like when my neighbors complained about something with noise, I immediately took care of whatever the problem was, but that's not how they treat us. So I'm opposed to the new outdoor courts at the JCC unless the project is required to have serious noise abatement measures as part of the project. Things like soundproofing panels and court covers, and the covers they're talking about, as I understood from the meeting, were just to cover sun and rain, but they need to cover sound, acoustic panels, and I don't think anything should proceed until these measures are in place. And as for the pools, as long as there's no additional or enhanced amplified sound, I don't have any objection to that. Based on the responses from the JCC over the past 20+ years to problems with noise and light, and I have noise problems because of the topography, their lights shine directly into my house and they call it moonlight. I call it, I can't sleep if I don't have blackout shades. And putting 20 or 30 new trees up along the border is not going to be sufficient to deal with the noise that's coming. With 32 million plus already raised, they can't plead poverty, which is what I hear when I ask about having the lights changed or having changes made to the sound system. And they need to the top of their list should be the privilege of being on residential land in a residential neighborhood and start treating neighbors like people instead of just an annoyance. And the problem is that they're essentially running a business and making decisions the way a business would, but not the way that residents would make decisions in a residential neighborhood. And so while most residents share common goals of keeping property values up and schools and making everything look nice and uniform, this is not their goal. And it doesn't negate what they bring to the community. It's just that their goals are not our goals, and sometimes we're on a collision course. And so at this time, I'd also like to ask what should have been done years ago, and that would be to add soundproofing measures to the day camp, which is right next to me, or eliminate the outdoor speaker system. I don't have any problem with children's noises or anything else that goes on. That amplified sound and the thumping and the screaming and telling kids to, I can't hear you, yell it louder. It is very annoying. And they have devalued my house. I don't know if I'll ever be able to sell it. This is my only home, my biggest investment, and it is not worth what my neighbors' homes are worth. I have a number of examples of promises made by the JCC that either weren't remembered by them or were never intended to be kept. And I'm not content to accept any promises now. I want to see an enforceable noise plan with a budget and an acknowledgement that they have a responsibility to be good neighbors to the people who live nearby. And I just want, last thing is sounds from bass speakers and basketballs, which they do plan to use on these courts, can't be measured in decibels. Low sounds have a longer wavelength. They travel more easily through solids like land than they do through air, which is the sounds that are measured by decibels, and causes thumping and vibration. I have submitted ordinances 3 times to City Council about vibration ordinances. There are 2 existing that I know of in the state of Georgia that have been implemented and in place for a while, one for all of Gwinnett County and one for Athens-Clarke County. So it's not as if it's a new idea or something that would need to be vetted. I'll cede the floor to the others.
Thank you. At this time, we would call Tom Simon forward, please. Again, we are on a clock, so we would ask for everybody, if you've got similar remarks, just keep it moving, please.
Okay, I'm reading from the Wall Street Journal. Pickle bans are beginning to take hold. The downtown New York City park banished the sport after too many run-ins between picklers and parents. The Journal covered the tempestuous debates inside homeowner associations. The bottom line is, you can't believe the noise, said one of the former presidents. Noise, lights, and hours. That's the problem that we see at the JCC. We're concerned because the JCC has tried to influence the Dunwoody Council before. I'll leave it at that. If the council ever does approve this, you've got to, actually, what the young lady said, you have to put so much there so that it will not affect noise, lights for the entire community. Okay. Well, I'll leave it at that. I'll say last thing is, the person has said about the notices. We got the first notice a month afterwards. The second notice was for this meeting only. That's the only 2 notices, and I live in Stevens Walk across the street from the JCC. They need to be a good neighbor. They have been in the past, but on this instance, and also concerning the path that's being considered on Tilly Mill, they have not been good neighbors.
Thank you. Ma'am, I believe you had raised your hand. Would you please provide Paul with your card before? Just go ahead and provide it to him and come on up, please.
Hello.
Can you please say your name and address too, please?
Yes, my name is Mary Shanks. I live at 2046 Lake Springs Way, 30338, which is 2 houses north of the Jewish Community Center. And I have been there for nearly 30 years. And the main problem I have is not the noise, the sewage system. Because my house faces toward the community center, the public sewer runs alongside the side of my house. And because of all the construction, not just of the community center expansion, but the houses north, public sewage has backed up into my basement. And in the last 6 months, I've had my whole basement, courtesy of DeKalb County. They came in and spent thousands of dollars, emptied out my whole basement, cleaned it all up, gave me a check for $36,000 to reconstruct it, the walls and everything. And my husband is newly wheelchair bound, and I also am disabled. I'm a retired DeKalb County teacher, and this has been emotionally and physically totally draining for us, having to deal with this and having 8-10 people at a time coming to work on my basement constantly, and I'm having to help monitor them. And it's been awful. And with more expansion going on over at the community center, I just am not sure, and nobody can promise me that they're going to do something about the sewage. And I just don't understand. No one has promised me any sort of mitigation for this, and it's been extremely troubling. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now invite, is it Stan Schwartz, please? Please introduce yourself and share your address, please.
My name is Stan Schwartz, and I live at 2221 Stevens Walk, which is the very first house inside the gate of the new development, which is the gate that's not directly across from the Jewish Community Center, but would be the closest houses to where the pickleball courts would be constructed. So that gate lines up pretty much with where the pickleball courts will be constructed. I have very mixed feelings about what's being proposed. I've been against the path which incorrectly has been proposed on Tilly Mill Road. There should not be a path on Tilly Mill Road, and certainly not on the east side. So I've been heavily involved with that. And then when I understood that this construction is being proposed, my concern is traffic. Tremendous traffic problems will occur on Tilly Mill Road, especially if the path is built, and the noise and the lights. So my houses are the closest. Alan Goldman and his wife Joan are here, and they're directly across the street from me, the first house on the south side of that entrance. Anyway, my mixed feelings are that I've been a member of the Jewish Community Center for 50 years or more than 50 years. First 20 plus years were at the old location on Peachtree Road. I have 3 daughters that I coached their basketball games, teams way back when. And I've been involved with, on a professional level, I'm a professional civil engineer involved with foundations and earthwork and hydrology. So I've been asked and have performed services both for fees and as gratis to the Jewish Community Center at the existing facility. Now they're building foundations or recommended by me, inspected by me. The tennis courts were recommended as to how to construct those courts there. I was involved with their earth dam, both at that site and at their campsite.
Thank you very much, sir. That's the end of the 10 minutes.
Okay.
At this time, I'm not sure if there are additional people that wish to speak. One of the things that it is our option to do as commissioners is extend the time. And I'm going to respectfully request that we entertain a motion to extend the time to give the folks here that have come to have a voice the opportunity to do so. Of course, in extending that time, we will also be required to extend the time for those in favor as well. So any number that you make in your motion effectively potentially double it, because we have to give both sides an equal opportunity to be heard. But I would respectfully request a motion to extend the time for a judicious amount of minutes.
I would make a motion to extend the time by 10 more minutes, both in opposition to and thereby in favor to.
There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Having heard a motion and a second, is there any debate? Seeing no debate at this time, all in favor of approving the motion, raise your hand. All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. So we've got an additional 10 minutes. again, I would ask, it looks like we've got a lot of faces here. I'm not sure how many folks do wish to speak, but I would respectfully request that you be mindful and attempt to not be duplicative as we push forward so that everybody can have a chance to have their voice heard. I have no more public comment sheets, but I do see I have more public comments. So, sir, I see you waiting there. If you'd come forward, introduce yourself. And right now, we're going to hear the rest of the opposition, and then we will go back and hear proponents at the end of that.
My name is Alan Goldman. I live at 2220 Stevens Walk. I'll make mine brief. You now have pickleball courts that are totally enclosed inside the center. I believe if you totally enclose the ones you are now proposing, so there's maybe no lighting shown, nor noise, then I'm in favor of you doing a pickleball courts and would be in favor, but it must be totally enclosed with no lighting and no sound.
Thank you. I just received another public comment card. Stephen Cadronell is 4, excuse me. We're going to put you on hold for a moment. That was 4. Okay. Is anybody else? We're actually, we're going to run the opposition real quick and then come back. Sir, if you'd like to come forward, please provide that card to city staff and introduce yourself.
Good evening, and thank you for giving us this extra time. My name is Ruben Helfgott. I've been living in Dunwoody since 1998. I raised my family here. I am going to be very, very brief. I live only about 4 or 5 houses farther away from the JCC than Miss Etchinson. So I'm just going to, no pun intended, just basically echo what she has said. Obviously, it's affecting us to a lesser degree, given the distance. But certainly we just, in the winter time when the foliage is almost gone, we see the light, and now in the spring and in the summertime, certainly with the summer, we hear the noise. So it does affect our ability to enjoy being outside. I just respectfully would like for more measures to be taken to minimize or maybe even reduce or eliminate the noise and the light. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak in opposition? Seeing none, we will flip back to the proponents. We have 10 minutes.
Thank you. I promise I won't take it all. Let me try to address some of these issues if I might. And the first one I want to discuss is the path. This application has absolutely nothing to do with the path. I know that there is a lot of dissension and argument in this community about whether we should have a path, where the path is supposed to go, what side of Tilly Mill is the path supposed to be on. We're impacted by that as much as anyone. To the extent it comes down our side of the road, we will lose property. So I think the community is all interested in this path, but it doesn't have anything to do with whether this application should be recommended for approval. And I just want to make that very, very clear. So the next thing I want to discuss is noise. If I move this pointer, does it show up there on your screen?
It does.
Okay. Our first speaker, Miss Etchinson, said that she lived in back of the day camp. The day camp is exactly where I'm circling right now. It is back at the back end of the property and it is on the lake. It is nowhere near these courts. I don't know what the situation is in terms of noise that she is experiencing, and I'm certainly not trying to belittle her experience in any way. I know how noisy things can get and how annoying it can be. But we have never been cited. There have been complaints made, obviously, and the city has not come out and cited us for violating the noise ordinance. There is a noise ordinance in place. It does directly relate, I think, more to just construction, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's general operational noise. In any event, we have never received any kind of warning, notice, request, anything from the city saying that we needed to do something that is different. I promise you that after living here tonight, we will go back and check and see what's going on, at what hours, because there are hour limitations upon when you can operate and the like, and certainly that would apply to loudspeakers if that's what we're using. But that area and where she's experiencing, as well as her neighbor, it's not even close to this particular part of the property. I don't know what the gentleman is saying about us trying to improperly influence the city of Dunwoody. It has not happened. I have not done it. My clients have not done it. I don't know what he's alluding to, but we vehemently deny that we have done anything improper as was implied. In terms of the sewer system, again, I am extremely sympathetic to the situation of what you've experienced. I can't imagine what that would be like in my basement, and particularly with your particular health situations. But it happened already. And it happened in a DeKalb County sewer line, which, as you all know, have been at the very least the subject of a lot of replacement activity over the past couple of years. We are under a consent order with the EPA. Not EPD, EPA, it's federal lawsuit, and we are supposed to be getting our sewer systems back in line. Dunwoody, of course, inherited what DeKalb had. So whatever you have experienced is truly the product of DeKalb County. This stuff isn't up and operating now, so we're not contributing to it now. But I suspect because they did in fact damage your basement, that's why the county came in and cleaned it up and then paid you money to try and fix it again. And that is the proper remedy for that, but that's not something that we created or caused in any way. And then last, it's neighborhood recreational centers belong in neighborhoods. That's where they're supposed to be. This is a well-established campus, which has been there for years and years and years, and certainly has been in DeKalb for years as well, but here for the past 70 years. And we're not getting these complaints on a regular basis. But every time I've handled one of these things, we go out, we meet with the community, and incidentally, Stevens Walk was on the list that got the notice, and we did meet with them. We met with Dunwoody Glen separately. There is some noise inherent to any kind of recreational opportunity. But we do not believe that this one is going to create the problems that have been alleged. And we did go to the trouble of having it studied. I did not want to come in here and not be able to answer those questions. I think they're legitimate inquiries from you all in terms of lights and noise. And I wanted to be able to bring you a study, not that I performed, not that my client performed, but that independent experts performed, to show you exactly what was going to happen as a consequence of this development. So we've given you that. We've given you the scientific basis for that. And we ask that you consider that and go ahead and recommend the approval of this application. If you absolutely insist on thinking we need noise barriers of some sort, we can look at that between now and city council, look at it in light of that report. Let's let the staff look at the report, see if they agree, disagree, or if there are other ways to address the issue. So I would ask you to go ahead and recommend approval with the understanding that we will do that between now and when we get to city council. And I will do the same thing for you in conjunction with the loudspeaker issue and whatever is being broadcast. My suspicion is swim meets some of it at night during the summer, but I don't know what's happening during the day. And I don't remember camp starting that early. So I will get to the bottom of that between now and city council. But the issues before you this evening warrant the approval of this application. We are an underutilized piece of property. We could be a lot more dense than we are, and we're not. And that's because we have been stewards of this community for a very long time. And we appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak as a proponent in favor? Mr. Cadronel.
Good evening. Stephen Cadronel, 339 Terra Trail, Sandy Springs. I hold the high honor of a past president of Marcus Jewish Community Center. I've also been very involved in the planning of these improvements in both neighborhood meetings that were held, one with the required neighbors and one over and beyond the requirements with the Dunwoody Glen Homeowners Association and the neighbors there. I just want to point out that while I can't state any better than Kathy has already stated, the concern about some of the neighbors that live much farther away from our pickleball court area. We did meet with the Dunwoody Glen homeowners, and as you see, none of them are here in opposition. We've worked with them to add the additional buffer area on top of the fact that according to our professional consultant, noise should not be an issue at the property line. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, will there be anybody else speaking in favor? Okay, with that, we're going to go ahead and close public comment. I'm just a point of procedure here. I'm reviewing this study literally for the first time as I sit here on this dais. I hadn't seen it before, but I may be missing some pages. I don't see anything about pickleball on the noise study. Are there pickleball pages that I might not have gotten?
Yeah, the first page on the noise study specifically references the plan to construct 12 new pickleball courts and 1 new basketball court. It was definitely tied to this use because they were measuring also from the location of the courts. So they had to be aware of the use because they were measuring the property lines, they were looking at tree buffers, and they were looking at how long sound attenuates. And sound, she's right, sound acts weird. It bounces. It doesn't move necessarily linearly.
Hang on, I don't want to go too far into this because I do want to keep an order about this. Are there similar decibel studies with pickleball? I play pickleball. I like pickleball. I've even watched it on TV. I know it's loud. I'd like to know in some of these matrices, are there decibel counts that were provided as part of that study?
I believe that in fact they have on page 3 of this study, there is a chart about dBA that is listed on the sound level analysis. And as I said, again,
I believe that's basketball only though.
players yelling and cheering during games, is that basketball only?
Well, but again, I'm asking about pickleball sounds. What I've heard everybody talk about here that's in opposition to it just about is about the sound. And I would just like to be educated. And not only did this show up right before the presentation, but I also am not seeing any pickleball specific. So as I did want to educate myself, maybe I don't have the whole presentation. That's what I
I
think.
think you do. I think what happened is that probably the basketball court was looked at because it is the closest of the structures.
Okay.
So they figured if they got that one, and that's open too, that's not enclosed, but if they got that one and were able to determine that there was no impact, that the others would follow.
Gotcha. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything as I took this back
I
and
know that they
considered
did
it.
measurements, and I certainly know they realized it was pickleball. That's a good question. I don't know if there are specific studies for pickleball.
Okay, okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and take a step back. We're going to go ahead and conduct the questions and answers kind of pursuant to our normal. I just wanted to make sure that I was singing out of the same hymnal that everybody else up here was. So at this time, I'd go ahead and throw it over to Commissioner Brown. Do you have any questions, sir?
Sure. I'll go ahead and start with the applicant since you're still standing. Could you clarify what, I think there was something in your application about the pickleball hours of operation. Could you clarify those? And then is it the same for the basketball courts or are those hours any different?
No, the hours should be the same for both. And I'm going to ask either, all right, Janice, would you like to answer that question, please, in terms of hours? I know that we're limited, but I'm not sure what the times are.
My name is Janice Wolf. I'm the Chief Financial and Administrative Officer at the Marcus JCC. The JCC officially closes at 10 most days. On Fridays, we close early because of the Sabbath. On Saturdays, we close early and we have shrunken hours, if you will. Nothing operates on our facility after 10 o'clock at night. As far as, I'm going to just stretch a little, the lighting, because the issue was raised with respect to the existing tennis courts that are way on the other side of the property. This lighting is different. It is newer lighting. You're probably familiar with the Musco kind of lights that go straight down. And the lighting study is part of what you have and what we performed in advance of this. So we do not expect there to be pickleball at 5 o'clock in the morning when our fitness center opens. Most activity doesn't start until 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. And our day camp is officially starting at 9 in the morning, not at 7:30. So I'd just like to clarify that as well.
Thank you.
And what in that space where the courts are proposed, what are the current activities?
There are 2 fields there now and the barn is on that side of the property as well.
Okay,
And I think there's a playground if I'm not mistaken. Play area.
and thank you. A couple questions for staff. Just going back to I think the noise, you had stated something about pickleball being noisier than tennis. I'm a tennis player. I'm familiar with the noises and playing on courts that are next to residences. What do you know anything about the nature of what makes pickleball noisier? It seems like approximately the same game. I'm just trying to, like Mr. O'Brien, trying to understand what the noise difference would be between tennis and pickleball.
So pickleball is, think of it as a ping pong racket, right? So it's just a lot louder. The ball is different. And so it makes a more plastic sound, I think is probably a good way to describe it sometimes. It's also a faster paced game. So you tend to have more hits, more movement on the court because it's smaller. And so between the nature of the racket, the nature of the type of the ball, and the nature of the movement of the game, it's generally an overall increased sharpness in sound and amount of sound.
Okay, and it's the same amount of players on a court, right? As a doubles? Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. And then in terms of, can you just kind of clarify the condition that staff is asking about the noise abatement? What would meet what you're asking and what would not meet it?
So the condition is not super specific. We haven't had direct conversations with the applicant regarding noise abatement specifically. We did receive the noise study today along with all of you. But essentially noise abatement strategies would include there's special types of fencing that you can attach to, like the general chain link fence that would be around typical courts. So that's an option. And we're also open to other types of noise abatement strategies, if that's deemed appropriate by the count or by you all and the council.
But we're not necessarily asking for a wall as the applicant.
Not
kind
a
of
not a
suggested.
wall specifically, but there are products that are specifically aimed at reducing pickleball sounds.
And then my last question is about the height. I guess if I understand correctly, currently they're not meeting the height requirement of 35, and so we're just putting a condition in there to make sure that it falls under that.
Yeah, the elevations showed a height taller than 40 feet. So we just are blanket, trying to enforce the maximum height of 35 feet. So as required by the zoning district.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's all for me.
Okay, I'll have questions for you first. Just as a reminder, what's the density percentage for RS 100?
By density, do you mean lot coverage?
Yeah,
So for this type of use, the maximum lot coverage is 60%.
okay. And also for the SLUP, this procedure covers like all of the existing, but also other improvements that are happening right now. I know we're just talking about the pickleball and basketball court, but there's other improvements on the site plan.
Yeah, so there's the general, overall existing facilities that are under the umbrella of this special land use permit. But again, what was triggering it specifically was the addition of the sport courts. So that's generally been the focus of our report, but everything is sort of falling under the special land use permit.
So something to point out on the site plan, the parking lot that's proposed by the pool would be replacing an existing sports field. And that parking lot has 125 new parking spaces. Does that not trigger like an additional traffic impact for the site?
So it does not trigger there are very few things in our code that trigger, traffic generation studies. And it's really related to our really big developments, like developments of regional impact, the DRI process. Again, so these types of improvements to the parking lot and the pool, again, didn't trigger the special land use permit process. But again, everything, is up for, your review as part of the special land use permit process.
I know you mentioned that all the stormwater would be covered in LDP. I know that with the additional added impervious, with just the parking lot alone, that would trigger that, but with the sports courts, of course, it would too. So
Yes, all of the, essentially all the work they're doing with the sport court and the parking lot is triggering those stormwater mitigation requirements.
okay. And then I have one last question for the applicant. So with the sports courts, there's the addition of the viewing platform, and I saw in the packet you gave us like a rendering of that. For the existing use and then the proposed use for your courts you have at the community center, do you host like leagues or tournaments or anything like that that would
No.
add? Okay, thank you. That's it.
Commissioner Harris.
So I heard that we don't expect any play before 8 or 9 a.m. or anything after 10 p.m. But my question would be, what are the defined hours of those courts? Sure, yes, please.
Not defined as of now.
Okay. You currently have sports courts?
We do. They are in the building. They are inside the gymnasium.
Okay.
The typical pickleball hours now don't begin until somewhere around 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. There are other activities going on in the gymnasiums. That is all inside the building. While we do open quite early in the morning, the people who come at that hour are coming into the building and using the fitness center. They are not on the tennis courts and they are not outside at all.
Okay. My next question, I think you can probably just say, my next question is why, it feels like there's opposition to noise mitigation. Why the opposition to noise mitigation when city staff has recommended it?
You're asking me?
For who,
as-
I'm sure, I don't know who would be.
We decided we would study the noise impact, and incidentally, I just checked the paper and the last paragraph talks about basketball being noisier than pickleball, so that was in there. We wanted to know exactly what we needed to do in order to screen this, no more, no less. We don't want to have to build unnecessary structures if they're not needed. If they're needed, as I said, if we sit down with staff, for example, and staff determines that in fact this study is correct and we get a question on whether pickleball is noisier than basketball and staff says we're still going to want you to do something, that's one thing. But right now the recommendation has been made in a vacuum because there was no study. So I think we need to sit down and reach, if it's possible, and I've never had a problem with your staff being reasonable, to try and work through that. So that's what we would do.
Okay, my next question is about the use of the courts. Is there a possibility that the courts would be used for something other than pickleball?
I don't know how. I mean, there's
Well, if they were taken down, if there would be assemblies out there?
no.
No? Okay. And then will a loudspeaker be used out there?
Will a loudspeaker be used out there? Not
For basketball games, for announcing, for any
Yeah, will a PA be installed?
Will a PA system, yes.
Right now, there are no plans for an outdoor PA system, but if there were, I could assure you it would not extend beyond the sound of our property.
I appreciate that. I'm gonna let you know that I live over on Leisure Drive and the sound does carry, and I live not near. So I am sharing with you so that you hear it from up here as well, that the loudspeaker sounds and the bass sounds do carry. And I think to your point, sound isn't linear. Wind, and in particular, you have a large lake there too. All of that does participate in the sound movement. So that's part of my questioning with this is how will this be utilized outside of just sports, tournaments and whatnot? If there's going to be a PA system involved, this all plays into the noise reduction request.
Right now, there is no PA system anticipated.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner?
Madeline, I got a couple questions for you. The closest court that's being proposed is, if I'm looking at the diagram correctly, it's 75 feet from the closest residence
From the property line.
and from the property line.
Mhm.
And that meets the setback requirements.
Correct. The setback along the closest property line, which is adjacent to Dunwoody Glen, that setback is 40 feet.
And I guess from the applicant, did I correctly hear that nobody from Dunwoody Glen is here? Oh, but you're not in opposition.
Thank you. Commissioner Gordon?
I don't have any questions or comments.
Okay, I've kind of been trying to peruse this. I'm, one of the things that's kind of frustrating sometimes when we're up here doing this job is information that presents itself at the last possible minute. And it makes it difficult to get a quality product when we don't have a lot of time to review it. I would ask for you to point me out where in the text it says that pickleball causes less noise than basketball. I'd like to see.
And
that.
on the first page of the handout, the Acoustica handout,
Yes.
at the bottom of the page, it states the image below illustrates the proposed athletic courts and their relationship to residential properties. Shortest distance between the proposed court to adjacent properties is the southwest corner of the basketball court, which is approximately 80 feet from the nearest residential property line. Given this proximity and the fact that activity from basketball is appreciably louder than that of pickleball, this condition represents the worst case scenario for potential sound transfer beyond the MJCCA grounds.
May I ask a question about, just to follow up on that, Tom? I'm sorry.
Please.
Could you elaborate? Is that basketball that's indoor basketball
No.
or outdoor basketball? Okay, thank you.
I would find it very helpful to review similar statistics. And again, I don't know whether they exist, whether you have them for pickleball. I mean, it's different noise. I get it. It's concussive at a much different frequency. But I enjoy pickleball. I like it. It sounds loud, plain and simple. It sounds like plus size ping pong. And so if I had a house along there, I'd be concerned about that. And of course, our noise ordinance does dictate that we assess this. And so I guess my concern here, in seeing this, would be to understand the expected noise generated from pickleball in particular, because it's less of a known entity, and what sort of effective noise abatement could be entertained and would be entertained to help mitigate some of this, to allow a project like this to happen without interfering or unduly burdening, the folks that live alongside there, not to mention folks beyond. And so I'm making more of a statement than a question here. Really, my statement is just kind of, I'd love to see this beforehand. It would help me be better
We
educated.
only got it last week, so unfortunately I couldn't get it to you in
Okay.
advance.
Understood. Okay, I don't think I have any further questions at this point, so I would turn it over to the commission for discussion or for sharing anything that you all believe is important as we try and form a pathway forward.
I have a quick question. So you have 12 pickleball courts and 1 basketball court. In order to provide more distance, and given that it was just shared that basketball is louder than pickleball and it's closest to the residents, would it be prudent to replace 4 of those pickleball courts with the basketball court and move further away from the residents?
I don't know if it would be possible from a topographical standpoint or not. That's something we have to look at. But it kind of begs the question, because if the basketball is let's assume it's louder for purposes of answering this question. It is the closest thing to the property line, and they did measure that, and they set the parameters of this study. We didn't say, go forth and measure only basketball. We said, we're putting in pickleball courts, and they measured from the basketball and said there was no impact. So that's the only way I know how to answer your question.
It said specifically no impact,
It said
or
there would be negligent.
no, I think, no, it's okay. I think to Commissioner O'Brien's point, receiving this in the moment is difficult because we haven't had time to review the language, and it feels like we're piecemealing it here. But that helps. So essentially then this plan is set in concrete. There would not be an ability to change where the courts are located.
I'm not going to make that statement because I don't think anything's ever set in concrete, frankly. Well, apparently Steve can speak to it, however, so he will answer it.
We have studied that topographically. And in fact, as staff can confirm, our original plan had pickleball courts much closer to the property than the plan you see now. As part of the study of the topographic and the engineering, it was determined that the best approach was to move farther from the property line. And we can do that with the basketball courts than we can with the pickleball courts. You can see from your drawing, pickleball court takes up a wider space than the basketball court. So flipping the two would actually move pickleball closer to the neighbors and also widen out the pickleball court along their property line. So it's just not feasible. And we've already made a lot of changes to move even farther away from the property line than we originally anticipated. That's also the reason for the additional tree buffer along our mature area. So to put the pickleball courts on the south end of the property would require us to grade an even larger area. The more we grade, the more of the current buffer we disturb.
Have you looked into noise abatement solutions, and what has been the result of that inquiry?
We have looked into noise abatement solutions, starting with the report that you see, starting with the fact that we are putting a covering over these pickleball courts, which also helps abate noise. That's why the open pickleball courts are on the far side of the closed pickleball courts. So the noise abatement that we've already implemented is a covering over the pickleball courts, a study that shows that basketball being the louder offensive noise would not be an issue at the property line, and the additional tree buffer that we've agreed to with the Dunwoody Glen homeowners who are most affected by these improvements.
I will say, and again, just late notice aside, this gives us some basis of analysis, at least to the basketball side, and informs a decision. I don't feel similarly informed with regard to pickleball and making a decision to support yay or nay based on what little I know about pickleball from this report as far as noise and noise abatement techniques. Several years ago, we would have said, you're installing lights. Well, that's a problem because the light goes everywhere. But now we know we've got some targeted LEDs that do a really good job of not dispersing beyond their intended target. There may be something similar for sound, and I would like to be educated about it because I would like to be able to support something like this with the knowledge that I know it's not going to impede upon the enjoyment of the land of those who live next to it.
And I agree with you. All I can do is refer to the independent professional consultant who does this for a living. And as you can read in his paragraph, the reason he focused on basketball is because in his professional knowledge, basketball is the more impactful sound. So he focused on basketball, knowing that pickleball was a less impactful occurrence.
Thank you.
And that's including 12 courts?
As you'll see, he references the drawing. So yes, he had knowledge of the entire plan, including the 12 courts.
Okay. Again, I'm sorry. Again, I'm sorry.
I'm going to go ask
This
for
is-
a comment to be withheld from the gallery, please.
This is just a reiteration that it's difficult. Like I know you've read this report. We haven't. And so I'm going to
Sure.
ask for patience
Certainly,
as we are trying to move through this.
understood.
Council, what's your pleasure? Commission.
I move that we approve the special land use application subject to staff's recommendations for noise abatement as necessary.
As drafted in the memo, is that what you're suggesting? Okay, we've got a motion to approve the project as listed in the memo. Is there a second to that motion?
I second.
Hearing a motion and a second, is there any debate?
Yes, I would like to propose adding amendments to that recommendation or to that
Well,
proposal.
you can certainly raise that, but it's going to be up
Okay.
to the
Right.
person making the motion to either add them or decline, and then depending on whether the motion survives, we'll have another.
So my concern with that recommendation would be, or that motion would be that two outstanding things. One, that we don't have to find hours for the outdoor use of those courts. And so I would like to make sure that within that motion that we have added onto staff's recommendations for a limitation of the use of hours that would mirror what our swim and tennis clubs probably utilize. And the second piece that would also be a recommendation that it be approved condition that no outdoor PA system is installed
Okay,
for these courts or for the pool.
Commissioner Cameron, Commissioner Harris has indicated that there are 2 points that she would be interested in adding to the motion. Do you want to restate your motion?
No.
Okay, so we've got a motion and a second. Is there any other debate, any other comment on this before we vote on the motion?
Yeah, for the most part, in agreement with the new conditions that were just outlaid, except I'm not sure why we're throwing the pool into the mix.
Okay.
I'm happy to withdraw the pool.
And I guess with the requirement of the hours, is there any Dunwoody ordinance that establishes hours of when outdoor activity can be placed? I mean, we all probably live in swim tennis communities and the swim meets go on until 10 o'clock at night. And I don't believe that there's an ordinance that limits that.
I believe the noise ordinance, and I'll ask staff to confirm this. I believe it's 11 PM to 7 AM. Am I speaking correctly?
That's correct. For like amplified sound, like music, those hours are correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that midnight on the weekends?
Yeah, the different hours on the weekends, those are for weekdays. Is midnight correct? Yeah, midnight for weekends.
Okay,
Okay, I'll add a condition subject to the Dunwoody ordinance on noise restrictions.
okay, so you withdrew your motion and then resubmitted it based on the staff's memo with the addition that, well, they're already going to be bound by noise ordinances, so I'm not sure why. Well, and again, we're capable of putting additional restrictions or making recommendations to council that they condition that they require more limited hours than the noise ordinance permits.
I didn't think I withdrew my motion.
No, I'm sorry. I was stating that because you added that to your motion and we've not voted on that. I wanted to make sure that we're procedurally as correct as we could.
If we're subject to the ordinance on noise, then it don't.
Okay.
We were just talking about whether I was going to withdraw my motion, which I did not. And given that the noise ordinance is going to be controlling anyway, I don't amend it
Okay.
either.
So your motion is in keeping with staff and you do have a second on that. I have not heard any debate from my right. Is there anything you want to wish to add before we vote on that? Okay, at this time, we have a motion and a second motion to approve according to staff's limitations. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, like sign. Okay, looks like we have a tie. I know tie goes to the runner, but I'd like to help, encourage a little procedural help here with the tie. It does not carry. Is that correct?
Correct. The motion does not pass.
Okay, thank you very much. The motion does not pass, so we're kind of back where we started. Is there anybody who would like to form a different motion?
I see value in this, and so by having it not pass and die is a problem for the product. I would like time to review the material we received today. And because of that, I would like to make a motion to defer this to the next meeting to allow commission time to review the plan submitted and also allow the JCC to make sure that they've covered pickleball court noise and also perhaps be able to provide more information on the covered courts so that we can have a better sense of the protection from the noise.
Commissioner Harris made a motion to defer. Is there a second to that motion? As commissioner, I believe it's my privilege to second that, so I will second that. Is there any debate?
Yeah, I'm a little confused. I did not vote for the previous motion because Ms. Harris had some conditions that she wanted to modify. So I was expecting her to come back with another motion that included those conditions. So, but then she ended up deferring.
Okay, at this time, we have a motion to defer moved and seconded. Is there any further debate or we want to move forward to voting on that?
So if that doesn't pass, then someone would have to make a third motion?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there any further debate or points of clarification? All right, at this time, we've got a motion and a second to defer. It appears the debate is done. So at this time, all in favor of deferring for a month to get additional information relating to the plan and the pickleball noise, raise your hand. All opposed, like sign. The motion does not carry. Okay. So, commissioners, what's your
So,
pleasure?
Point of clarification, I just saw 5 pence total. What?
It was 4 against.
4 against, okay, thank you.
Okay, well, Commissioner Brown, I think you had thoughts about what you believed you could approve. Do you want to go ahead and form a motion?
I motion to approve the special land use application with staff's conditions and with the additional condition of a PA system not being added to the newly constructed court facilities.
Okay, Commissioner Brown formed a motion to approve pursuant to staff's recommendations with the addition of no PA being permitted on the location. Did I restate that correctly?
Yes, correct.
Okay, is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Commissioner Shin seconded. We've got a motion and a second. Is there any debate or thought? Hearing none, I think it's appropriate to vote at this time. All in favor of approving that motion, raise your hand. All opposed, like sign. The motion carries 4-2. Thank you, everybody. Okay, folks, our next item of business. Are we ready to proceed to review and consideration of text amendments to the Code of the City of Dunwoody for Chapter 27, Article 5? Okay, thank you.
Good evening, once again. I'm up here all night. So I think I'll give everyone just another minute to clear out. What was that? Oh, God, I hope so. I have some leftover risotto from lunch that I can split up into little 7 tiny portions if you all want a snack. All right, well, I think I'll go ahead and proceed. So we have 4 text amendments under consideration, just in terms of respect for everyone's time this evening. I'm just going to go through them all in one presentation and just give you sort of the summary of what we're doing. So the first text amendment is we need to demonstrate compliance with new zoning procedures laws and appeals processes at the last year's Georgia State Legislature passed some new bills that include new regulations for public notice requirements and public hearings, as well as some advertising requirements for quasi judicial processes. Our second text amendment is we need to demonstrate compliance with new water efficiency requirements that have been that are required by the Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District. That is a mouthful. And then we are also adding some new parking requirements for home occupations and adjusting our non-conforming use regulations. So to get into a little bit more detail about the zoning procedures laws and appeals processes changes. So the 2 bills specifically were HB 1405 and HB 916. So HB 1405 essentially created a new, more intensive process for public notice requirements and public hearings, and it only applies to city initiated rezonings when you are trying to change single family zoning to anything more intensive like multifamily zoning. An example of this, the one city that's already undergone these new standards was Decatur, when they did a zoning code update to allow more density on single family lots. They had to go through these new requirements. It essentially requires larger ads in our legal organ. So in the crier, it would essentially be a full page ad. And then signage needs to be posted every 500 feet on the affected properties. So it's definitely more intensive than the typical process when you're undergoing city initiated rezonings. The other thing that HB 1405 did was update public notice requirements from 15 days to 30 days for quasi judicial proceedings. And that didn't affect our code too much. For most of our quasi judicial proceedings, we already require a 30-day notice. And then the second state law that went into effect was HB 916. And I'm going to state this right now. I'm really not the expert on this one. It updated the appeals process for zoning decisions. So if anybody is unhappy with the decision by council or the Zoning Board of Appeals, there's an appeals process where it goes to the Superior Court. And the current process for that is called a writ of, I wish Kathy was here to maybe help. How do you pronounce it?
Certiorari.
Yes, that. So they've updated it. So it's the appeals are now made as what's called a petition for review. So it just affects that. It's not necessarily anything to do with us. It's again at the Superior Court level, but they have changed the process a bit. So overall, this is affecting chapter 27, which is our zoning ordinance, and it's affecting Article 5, divisions 2, 3, 5, 6, and 8. So the second text amendment that we're proposing is
Madeline, may I ask you something really quick? We're going to need to make 4 motions.
correct. It's 4
correct.
separate agenda items.
Would it make more sense for us to move along the way here and?
That's totally up
and
to y'all. I was proposing
What do
to
you
do them all at once, but you can do them separately.
I think, well, let's see. Does anybody have questions about that first one that we want to put to staff? Okay, if everybody feels like their voice has been heard, we can entertain a motion and move this forward. Is there anybody who has a motion on that?
I'll make a motion to approve the text amendments to Chapter 8, Article
So
4.
chapter 27.
Oh, I'm sorry. Where
Item
am
number
I?
4, chapter 27, article 4. It's on the first page.
The front side.
Oh, gosh, sorry, guys. Yes, make a motion to approve chapter 27, article 5.
Commissioner Harris moved to approve that. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there were multiple seconds. I heard Commissioner Cameron first. Is there any debate or discussion? All in favor of approving the motion, raise your hand. All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Madeline. We're ready to move on.
Sure. So the second text amendment is for incorporating new water efficiency requirements. Essentially, we were provided model ordinances from the water planning district, and we've essentially adopted or are proposing to adopt those into our code as they were presented to us. These new rules have requirements for new car washes to install recycled water systems. And then there are also requirements updating the local plumbing code to specify things like water efficient plumbing fixtures, you know, things for like sprinklers and your, you know, kitchen sinks, etc. And this affects chapter 8, article 4.
Can I ask a question?
Mhm.
How many car washes are in the city of Dunwoody? Do you know?
That I don't know off the top of my head. There's not a ton.
Automatic ones? There's
Richard
Four.
says
We're
4.
hearing from Richard that there.
4. And then are we going to provide notice to the affected businesses?
So this would be for new car washes. So if they wanted to redevelop, they would be subject to these standards.
So these standards would only affect an basically non-existent car wash at this point.
Yeah, currently we don't have any proposed. We just have the existing ones.
Okay.
My question for you is regarding homeowners. I remember when the city of Dunwoody came to pass, there were some prior to selling a home, before Dunwoody took over, you had to replace all your appliances with high efficiency toilets, for example. Is this affecting any homeowners who wish to sell their property after this takes effect? Are they now bound to replace their appliances?
I don't know the answer to that specific question. I'd have to take a closer look at the code. Do you know, Paul?
Yeah, this is a amendment to the building code. So our chapter 8, also the local amendments to the building code, and building code is generally, there's no requirement to bring something into compliance with new standards unless significant work is done around something. So we have plenty of buildings that have sort of old, non-compliant electric circuits, for instance, or plumbing systems, and there's no requirement for that now.
Okay, so I'm hearing you say there's no additional burden on pre-existing built things unless there's a major project. Okay.
So even if they're replacing a sink or something,
If they were replacing something that triggered the need for a plumbing component permit, that would be something that would be under the building official's purview.
but if you're just like replacing your toilet or sink or
That's
So
not
typically
this.
what triggers those types of component permits is if you're moving something around. So, you know, the way we enforce chapter 8 is when people are coming to get permits. But if it's not something that triggers a permit, we have no way to enforce.
But that's not covered by this text amendment, is it?
So anything new that you would get a permit for would be covered by this text amendment.
And technically, so it's not just stated that anything that is covered by a permit needs to be, technically, it's like all new fixtures need to have these requirements. Now, whether this happens or not, you know, we have no way of knowing unless a permit is pulled. We expect, like, because this is for the entire metro region, but like all new fixtures have to have these requirements so that the Home Depots and so forth will sell these types of devices, because that's the only thing that can be installed in the region. But technically, like, we only come into play if a permit is pulled. Yeah. So like the replacement of the individual sink wouldn't come under our purview. Yeah.
Okay, and sale of property would not be a triggering event.
No.
Okay. Any other commission questions? Well, we're ready to form a motion.
I did it last time. I'd like to make a motion to approve chapter 8, article 4.
Commissioner Harris made a motion to approve the changes proposed for chapter 8, article 4. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Shin seconded. Is there any comment or debate? All right, at this time, we'll vote. All in favor of the approval of that motion, raise your hand. All opposed, like sign. And the motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
So the next amendment up for consideration is the parking requirements for home occupations. This was prompted by code enforcement complaints. Essentially, there have been instances where significant number of work trucks that are associated with home occupations have been parked. And so we are proposing an enforcement mechanism to prevent that. It's something that other jurisdictions have to maintain a residential character in a neighborhood. So this gives us an avenue to, enforce a standard like that. And it the text amendment limits those number of vehicles to 1 per dwelling unit, and it limits those vehicles to people that occupy the home.
Can you tell me what our current status is and how this changes it, please?
So our existing code doesn't necessarily address this directly. Paul, do you have a little bit more information?
Yeah, the code simply states that no sort of commercial vehicles can be parked, but it is worded in a way where this is sort of like very large vehicles like semis, for instance, or that they can be parked as part of a home occupation. I think where this is coming into play is that if someone has a home occupation, so they do not have a formal business address, then we don't want these places to be used sort of as contractors' equipment yards. So we put this restriction in there that it's only up to 1 vehicle and can only be driven by the occupant. So it can't be sort of where multiple people come because I do not have a work location, a commercial location. And then I have people come in the morning, drive those vehicles, bring them back in the evening to get at that type of behavior.
So is a home occupation, is this driven by everybody working from home now? Is that?
No, generally, like if you're working from home for a company or like for some kind of organization, that's just you sort of in your private capacity still. If you start a business and you're, let's say, like an attorney and you do not have an office location, you have to have a business license somewhere to be practicing, and then you would do that as a home occupation.
Okay, going with that permutation you just noted. If we've got somebody practicing law out of their house, does this suggest that they can never have anybody visit them because that would involve a car that is not driven by the occupant of the dwelling?
So our home occupation section already limits visitors to a property for certain types of businesses. So the way our home occupation section is written is we have type A home occupations, and those are things that really are just the one person, occupant of the home, not receiving visitors. And then we have a type B home occupation, and that is for people where they're having a little bit more of an active business. So people that tutor, people that, practice law, and the type B home occupations trigger the special land use permit process.
But again, going with that, for the folks that tutor, is this not triggered by somebody who's running a tutoring business?
And we worded it in the way kind of where it's vehicles associated with the home occupation. So like it's like a truck in livery, or it's like something that is sort of used as part of the home occupation. This is not sort of in sort of your scenario. I think it's like the vehicle is associated with the visitor, or like with the visitor to the property, and would not be affected by this. So this is for the vehicles that are used sort of in association to, or with the business to complete the functions of the business. So like a work truck, or like something of that, like of the like.
Okay.
Can I propose a scenario to maybe help explain? So for example, if I'm a tutor and I have students come to my house, they can still continue to come to my house this does not address that. The flip side to that, though, is if I run a tutoring business and let's say I have people come work for me and I park 3 cars marked with my tutoring business outside in my driveway. And I have folks come to my house and pick up the car to go to other people's homes to go tutor. So it wouldn't allow me to use my driveway as a storage location for more than one vehicle for my marked or for the purpose of my business.
Yeah.
So it doesn't prevent people from coming to my house to utilize my service. That's within the scope of the city allowed. It changes the scope of me being able to have more than one vehicle parked outside of my closed garage that would be utilized for my business. And it also wouldn't allow me, and tell me if I'm reading this incorrectly, if I had those 3 cars, I couldn't have them because I could be the only driver for them. So
And that's sort of the short of it is that what you're describing is not a sort of a legal home business. Like a home occupation is not supposed to have sort of multiple staff people. That is supposed to happen in sort of our commercial districts, not in the residential district. Home occupation is purely sort of for you and your function as the resident to sort of have a small business there, and then under certain circumstances, there can be an additional person, or under certain circumstances, there can be a visitor, but it is not supposed to be sort of a sort of occupation with multiple people on site.
Okay, so this is strictly, okay, all right, this is a little bit narrower than I.
Yeah, and are we
but
talking
I-
about commercial vehicles?
So there is an exception written into this for class 1 type vehicles, which would be sort of regular cars are not punished as part of this. It's really aimed at sort of the bigger work trucks and like delivery vehicles.
But that's already as it's written. That's not a new change, correct?
So the section, we've added essentially a new section limiting the number of commercial vehicles, but that new section does not specifically target what are deemed class 1 vehicles, which are just like a regular passenger vehicle, like a, I don't know, a Prius or just like a regular vehicle. The section is specifically aimed at large trucks and delivery vehicles.
Okay, and it's strictly targeted at home occupation. So for
Correct.
somebody who
Mhm.
ran a plumbing outfit out of their home, but they obviously wouldn't do plumbing at their home all the time, they'd have to go elsewhere. The work truck, unless it's a class 1, would be prohibited. The labeled work truck would be prohibited unless it's class 1, and that would be prohibited elsewhere in the code, correct?
Multiple work trucks would be prohibited, but you can have your one work truck.
And they can park in one vehicle.
But that's not associated with a
Mr.
home
Mr.
occupation.
Chairman, let me sort of also, if let's say you happen to be a plumber and your spouse happens to be a plumber and you both have take-home vehicles, sort of, that is not affected by this because there's no home occupation on the site. It's just you and your spouse sort of happen to be plumbers.
Okay.
This is not affected by this.
All right, that's what I was looking for.
I have like an example then. If my friend is like a dog trainer and they have a car that has like the wrap, that's like the dog training business, and they do some of the dog training out of their house, and that's a home occupation, they can have that one vehicle parked outside of their garage. But let's say one of their other trainers comes there also doing training or something at the house, or left the vehicle there, they would not allow to do that. Have the 2 cars parked there, just be the 1 car.
So.
Sorry, we're getting like convoluted with these examples.
Yeah, again, we're sort of getting into the types of home occupations that wouldn't be legal. But generally, you could have your like one, vehicle that's associated with your business with the advertising wrap. You can have that one vehicle. You just can't have multiple that are associated with your home business.
And the home business being the operative word there, and I think that's what my question was. Okay. Any other commission questions? All right, anybody wish to form a motion?
I recommend approval for the text amendment to chapter 27, article 3, division 3.
All right, Commissioner Shin recommended that we approve item 6 on our of section F on our agenda. Is there a second? Commissioner Brown seconds. Hearing a motion in a second, is there any debate or discussion? Hearing none, hearing none. All in favor of approving the motion, raise your hand. All opposed, like sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Okay, so our last text amendment, woohoo, is for non-conforming use regulations. And this was prompted by, our experience as the community development team, doing business license reviews for zoning, and coming up against challenges and really enforcing our new codes, specifically in the Dunwoody Village, for example. But essentially, our non-conforming use regulations dictate a set of circumstances that would essentially phase out non-conforming uses. The term that's used in the code is called abandonment. So if you abandon that use, you cannot reinstate it. But our definition of abandonment is really loose. In most circumstances, we can't consider a use as abandoned, which means we can't phase out undesirable uses that aren't permitted. So like, for example, in the Dunwoody Village, our new Dunwoody Village code prohibits things like drive-throughs. So that, is a challenge to us to bringing the Dunwoody Village into conformance with the current code. And our current code is also sort of out of line with surrounding jurisdictions. They are, essentially more strict about their non-conforming uses. So our code matches those surrounding jurisdictions and essentially says, if you discontinue your use for, is it 6 months? So if you discontinue your use for 6 months, you cannot reinstate it. And like I said, our current code is very lax. Our current code only requires that you advertise that your property can be used for, say a drive-through. And as long as you're doing that, we can't say it's abandoned and we can't say you have to discontinue this. So essentially, we are putting a time limit and saying if you pause your use for 6 months, you can't reinstate it. Or if you have any lapse in your licensing requirements, that's also a way that you can lose your legal non-conforming status and be required to discontinue the use.
Is there any opportunity to extend that time? Like, if there's some hardships or something like that and a business says, okay, we've not used this for 5 months and we're about to come up on 6 months, is there any way for them to get a hardship exception or anything like that? Just seems like a little bit of a quick timeline.
Yeah, when you're getting into the hardship that really gets muddy and gray, and I think that's kind of where we're at with our current code, where it's like kind of hard to phase out these undesirable uses. I would say if you want to amend the code, my recommendation would maybe say to go from 6 months to maybe a longer period. Some jurisdictions go up to 12 months. I wouldn't recommend anything beyond 12 months.
What are the ones that you looked at? Are they're kind of in a range of
Yeah, we
even
actually have
shorter to even longer?
we have a packet detailing our comparisons to adjacent jurisdictions. So Roswell, it's actually 90 days. Brookhaven, 6 months. Chamblee, 1 year. Sandy Springs, 1 year. Alpharetta, 60 days. So there's a range in there, discontinuing for 1 month to up to 1 year.
Well, so looking at the code section that you attached, it already says a non-conforming use is presumed abandoned when the use is discontinued or ceases for a period of 6 months, right? Is that existing?
Yes, but it also has that caveat that says, if they are essentially demonstrating that they're, intending to reinstate it by doing things like advertising it for that use, that 6 months doesn't necessarily apply. So that's what we're essentially getting rid of.
And how often do you have to renew a business license?
So business license renewal occurs yearly, and every business that's on sort of our list of current businesses gets sent every year, their renewal paperwork.
What is the likelihood that this process could be kind of weaponized? I'm being serious because we've seen it like with the Oasis over there, failure to renew a license, and they continued, and it bought the whole bunch of litigation for Dorval. And I know there was other uses there that are kind of outside of this. How likely is it that this is going to lead us to litigation because suddenly we don't want to renew anybody that has a vape business or something along those lines?
Or could I add on to your question?
Sure.
Or, for example, to the weaponizing almost entrapment, if they're a day late in renewing, would that trigger a nonconformity? Like, for example, do we have a grace period on renewals where, if as long as the renewal is received within 7 days of, I'm just curious because I think to Commissioner O'Brien's comment is like that entrapment, like, are we looking to catch them? And how often is that a problem?
And we have sort of, taking a business license is for a calendar year. And we have like our deadline for the submittal until or by when we consider something delinquent is really April 15th. So that's already like 3.5 months sort of into the calendar year.
Is that written anywhere or is that just kind of SOP?
I would have to check our chapter 10 of our code real quick.
But it's been always April 15th. Like we're not changing that. That's the deadline every year.
I guess I think what I'm asking, and I'll get off my soapbox here, is if a business produces the required paperwork, the required tax payment, files it, and the city declines to process it or issue a license, the city effectively with the stroke of a pen can end businesses or consider the use as abandoned. How likely is that to happen?
To my,
And I have one more note, kind of like if it really is in a way that we would deny a business license, the business would not be operating legally under any circumstance. So if someone, for whatever reason, does not get a business license renewed, then they're out of compliance with the licensing standards in the city of Dunwoody already and would be sort of issued or would be. So we do, if someone does not get their business license renewed, we're sending code enforcement out already under current circumstances, independent of sort of non-conforming status. Because then they're not just like not legally non-conforming, they're really sort of an illegal operation in the city and they're subject to our existing enforcement mechanism. So if they're out of a business license, that's a sort of worse thing than sort of being out of the non-conforming status already. Yeah.
Okay, so this is not likely to be used as a weapon to strip a piece of land or a business of
it's sort
the
of-
non-conforming use?
Like in a really hypothetical, if we, for whatever reason, do not renew a business license, the business is subject to enforcement already. Sort of if that would happen for, I'm not going to speak to weaponization or anything, but like if we cannot renew a business license for any reason, then the business is subject to enforcement action.
Okay.
So this basically applies to grandfathered non-conforming uses.
correct.
Okay.
I use those terms interchangeably, grandfathering, legal non-conforming, yeah.
Any other questions? All right, any motions?
I move that we approve the change to text amendment to section 27-554, non-conforming uses.
All right, Commissioner Cameron moves that we approve that. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Shin seconds it. Is there any discussion or further questions? At this time, all in favor of the motion, raise your hand. All opposed, like sign. Motion carries unanimously. All right, thank you. Next item of business is other business. Is there any other business? Is there any public left to comment? Any public comment? Is there any commission comment? At this time, hearing no commission comment, we'll go ahead and adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.